Okay, so welcome everybody. Sorry, there's just a few steps that I have to do in the middle of all of this. So today is our fourth session of 4-H orientations, and today there's three topics that we're gonna be talking about. One is the use of the 4-H name and emblem. And then the second one is general risk management. I think it's always important that we know about risk management. And then the third one we're going to talk about is the 4-H essential elements. And so just to start with the use of the name and emblem. So the 4-H name and emblem, if you're not familiar, is a federal mark, and it has protections and standards that actually exceed that of trademarks and copyright. So it's actually even more so than things that are trademarked and copyrighted. And the one thing that we need to, I think is really important for us to remember is that, using the 4-H name and emblem is a privilege, and sometimes we need to remind our volunteers and and even our members that it is a privilege and it requires federal authorization to use that. Now, the way that happens is there's different ways that can happen. Number one, for that authorization level, if a club or the county is using the name and emblem, and it's not going to go outside of the county lines as far as if the clubs are making club t-shirts or if they're using the name and emblem, then the county gives that permission. And typically it needs to be probably the educator that signs the program officer, program manager needs to sign that paperwork, the faculty member, but knowing that our 4-H staff are the ones actually pretty much doing that. But when you look at kind of that, if you have something that's going to cross county lines, then that needs state approval. So trying to think of some examples. So an example would be like if honestly, and we've never done this before, and I need to let people know too, it just kind of came to me, camp t-shirts. Because you have multiple counties using camp t-shirts, if you use the Clover on those and get those printed, then that permission really should come from the state level. Typically, it's not going to be an issue, but it is something that we need to be thinking about. And then the other authorization would be if you have something that's going to cross state lines. So an example that I have for that is actually when I worked in Idaho, we had a company, a meat packing or a meat packer that they had advertisements on the news. Now, we won't go into the fact, I'll talk about that later, but they were turned into USDA. But technically, because that news station reached Jackpot, Nevada, that was their that was their news, even though it was based in Idaho, it still had an audience in Jackpot, Nevada. It needed needed that federal or that USDA permission in order to use the 4-H name and emblem. Or when I was in Michigan, there was a really, really good candy company in the UP, and one of the county that it was in worked with that candy company to make 4-H Clover chocolate bars. So they were like a circle and it had the 4-H Clover in it, and they sold those as a fundraiser for their 4-H program in that county. They had permission to sell them statewide. Well, when I moved and went to another state, I thought, oh, what fantastic gifts to give to speakers and that kind of thing. And so I asked about buying them, and they didn't have that federal permission yet, that USDA permission yet. So I couldn't buy them. I was really sad. So, but again, those are the types of things we need to think about. And we can revoke someone's use of the name and emblem at any time. So when you see that Title 18 USC 707, what that means is the federal protection that we have is Public Law 772, Title 18, United States Code 707. So it really does have a meaning. So with the 4-H, with that name and emblem, it cannot be, you cannot use the words 4-H club or 4-H clubs unless you have the authorization along with the emblem. I mean, that's one of the unique things too. And then the fines can be up to $5,000 for individuals or $10,000 for a group, for an organization, and it can result in imprisonment. So things that, and it's, you know, essentially it's a federal crime to defraud the emblem. Now, that's an intent to defraud. You know, things happen and we know it. I'm guilty of it just like anybody else. But you can't change the clover in any way. So you really can't change the color from the prescribed colors. You can't change the leaves or the insignia. So, you know, that's one of the pieces. Now, again, that's an intent. So an example that I use quite often is I was doing this presentation at a new staff orientation when I was in North Dakota. We were in the middle of our Extension Youth Conference, which would be similar to the Discover Your Future in Nevada. And so I was running around and I was the advisor for the ambassadors and they were the ones that ran that program. And so I was running around in my conference t-shirt, we had a different color than the students, but still same thing happened. And I'm looking, you know, I'm giving this presentation about the name and use of the emblem. And all of a sudden somebody goes, "You mean you're not supposed to do that?" and points to the sleeve of my shirt. Well, I had on a navy blue shirt, like I do today, and a bright turquoise clover on the sleeve. We had done turquoise shirts with navy blue writing for the delegates and then navy blue shirts with turquoise writing for the ambassadors to kind of distinguish them during the time. Now, granted, you know, it didn't matter on the front with the logo on it. None of that mattered, but that bright turquoise clover on the sleeve, that mattered. Now, was it an intent to you know, not use the clover properly? No, it was just truly, we had just messed up. You know, nobody had caught it. It was one of those, and things like that happen. We know it, you know, and USDA knows it as well. But you have to, you know, when you look at the clover, you can see where it says protected under 18 USC 707. That must be there. Now, I'm going to show you some other ways that it can be on the clover. It doesn't have to look just like that. That's just one example. But you have to have the USC or the 18 USC 707. The only time that you don't have it on there is when the clover gets to be so small that that you can't read that 18 USC 707. Now, you know, that's typically if you're putting on a shirt or those types of things. And sometimes when you're embroidering on something, you don't have to have that. I don't have it in here with me, but some of you that have seen my, I have a soft shell jacket that I got from National 4-H Mall, and it's got the clover on the kind of up on top on the collar, and they don't have that because, again, the clover's only about that big and it would be so small, and it's hard to embroider that on there. So sometimes that, you know, sometimes they will look at that. You also, again, you can't use the words 4-H club or 4-H clubs unless, or any combination of those words unless you have authorization. So this is where sometimes we have businesses within our communities that really want to help promote 4-H, which is fantastic. But what we have to make sure is not happening is they're not using the 4-H name and emblem for their own personal profit of that business. So that's why it's important that they get authorization. And I don't think I can find it really quick, but one, I might be able to. Let me look. There is, so I found some, well, I had one of Cody's pictures, or a picture that I took published. Okay. Sorry, I'm going to stop sharing this and I'm going to share this picture so you guys can see this. and this is kind of questionable. And, you know, I didn't say anything just because I don't know what the permission is. But if you guys can see this photo, you can see the Stockland livestock auction. You know, I mean, they're not doing anything, you know, but using the 4-H clover, all of these are using the 4-H clover. You know, I like when they say like proud supporter of 4-H. Okay, that's a little different than the Citizens Bank one that really doesn't have, it doesn't talk about being a supporter of the 4-H program. And so that's where you start getting into a little sticky situation. I personally do not know if these are legal or not. But I also, you know, it's a newspaper is what it's from. So yeah, but again, you know, when you have companies in your community that want to do something like that, you know, you've got to look at that and ask those questions. Okay, sorry, I'm going to go back to sharing my screen again. Okay, let me get the chat box up again. Okay. So also, the other piece is when a club is chartered, when you send in the paperwork to charter a club and you get that back, that is what gives them permission to use the 4-H name and emblem. Now, there will be a few changes because I know in Nevada they have been chartering like they've been chartering leaders councils and some of those other organizations, which is fine. But we're going to be changing that process up in the new 4-H year because they're actually affiliate groups and all they need is a letter from us giving them permission. So that will be, you know, something that we'll be doing. Again, you know, you've got those, it could lead up to imprisonment. So you have, you know, some examples. Here's one example of also, you know, I shared a couple of examples, but here's one where you need permission to use the 4-H name and emblem. We had a baker, like a bake shop, call and ask ask for permission to use the 4-H emblem to put onto cookies to sell. So they wanted to make 4-H clover cookies. But they weren't really willing to give 4-H any of the profit from it. You know, it was basically to promote her business. It was to make a profit for her own business. And at that time, the state program leader in that state denied that request. You know, with the when I said about the chocolate candy bars, that benefited the 4-H program in that county. So the state program leader gave permission for them to use the 4-H name and emblem. You know, that's really kind of where we need to, you know, outside entities beyond just the 4-H clubs need to, you know, if they're making a significant profit on that product, then that's where we have to question those things. So we're going to talk about a little bit about things that you can and can't do. You know, one thing to remember, it is our legal responsibility of Cooperative Extension and to USDA to secure that and ensure that the clover and the 4-H name and emblem is consistent and correct use. And that's at all levels of our salaried and our volunteers, of our 4-H participants, and even the non-extension entities. And I know Sarah had shown, there was an email that had gone out from a private company that was selling 4-H items, and I do know that they have permission to use the 4-H name and emblem at the national level, but then it was they were not using it properly, especially the 4-H grows here, which is a little different but still needs to be used correctly. But you know, and we need to, and I think it's critical that we share this information with our volunteers as well. So here's some examples that you should not do. And these, I will tell you, all three of these I used to do all the time before I knew all of the rules, especially the clover kind of with the green in the middle and then faded out to the white. I personally think it looks really cool, but again, that's not a legal, you can only have, your clovers can only be green with white H's. They can be black with white H's. They can be white with black H's, or they can be a metallic gold. And I have some examples in here of that. But I also love the marbled one. It's just kind of cool looking, and sometimes you get tired of the same old thing, but not allowed. So you cannot use the clover as a watermark. And this is probably the one that I see the most. And I used to do it all the time again. It's not something that, I've always, it's like, oh no. But it truly is. And this is the watermark. So you cannot have the clover in the background, kind of faded out clover with wording over it. I used to do it all the time for newsletters and letters and all kinds of certificates, all of that. And that is not allowed. You're not allowed to have anything superimposed on top of the clover. And in fact, if you have anything around the clover, there are guidelines on what the distance should be between the clover and the item. So here's some examples of what's wrong with these clovers. So you can see this one, they've put 4-H Club on top. This is, can anybody see, if you want to type in the chat box, what you think is wrong with this clover? Is everybody quiet? Okay, yep. It's not only enlarged. What they did is they enlarged it this way, but they didn't enlarge it this way. So yeah, so it's wide. And so what you have to do and I can't show you on here, but when you have to make a clover bigger or smaller, you want to make sure you get the box around it, and you want to take the corner and make it bigger. You don't want to take the sides and make it bigger. Oh, I didn't want to get rid of that one. And then this one, okay, again, what they've done is they've enlarged, or they've made it smaller this way and enlarged it. So it's skinny. It's a skinny little clover. Now this is really interesting. So I decided to do a little experiment today, and I just did a quick, hey, let me go out and see what clovers are out on what clip art is out on the website. And these are what I found. So you can see the Cedar Rapids 4-H Club. It looks really cool, but what's wrong with it? Anybody? Can you guys see there's a couple of things wrong with it first. I know it's hard on this. I try to make it as interactive as I can. Okay, it's not solid green. That's one too. And technically that's probably the wrong color of green. It's a dark green, but and it's got wording over the top. So if it does have the USC 707, you can't see that. This one is probably okay. The elite of, I think it's the elite of the Northeast. I think that's what that one's from. I would kind of question that one a little bit for the fact that, yes, it's outlined, but there's some things that are pretty close to it. What it is the 4-H clover was really supposed to be, and this is where we run into issues with the UNR and with our logo compared to the with the clover, is UNR wants their logo front and center, 4-H wants their logo front and center. So we have to figure out how we can make both of them front and center. But this one, the 4-H logo kind of gets lost in that. Obviously, you can see with the keep calm and 4-H on, that wording is right on top of the clover. This little doggy one, they've used the proper clovers. They just put a little doggy on top. And then also down here with the 3 clovers, those are not official 4-H clovers. When you look at the one underneath the doggy, that is an official 4-H clover. Those are not. And so they should not have the H's on them. So, but again, this is, I just pulled these up an hour ago. All I did was type in 4-H clip art, and these came up. And so if you're if you're a volunteer, or you're you're a newer staff person and you don't know any better, you're probably, you may decide try to use one of those. And I really, I don't like being the Clover cop, but sometimes it does happen. And please, for those of you that are on, if I end up sending an email to you that just says, hey, I noticed you use this Clover in this way, probably not appropriate, you need to switch that graphic. Please don't be offended by it. It's just one of those things that, I take it as a teachable moment. I'm not going to, now if you're a habitual offender of it, then I'm probably going to get a little bit crabby after like the 5th or 6th or 10th time. But again, most of these examples that I'm sharing with you are things that I have done myself. So that's why I like to share them. These are not, but again, these are clip art. And the one where I find it probably the most is like on Facebook, and not that I Facebook stalk anybody, but I do try to look at 4-H clubs, especially our clubs. Our counties are really pretty good. I've never really noticed too many issues, but our clubs will go out and pull off clip art like this and post it on Facebook. And it's like, okay, it's time to have a conversation with that club about what's appropriate and what's not. So here are examples. Sorry, this is one that I just redid. I wanted to share with you what were legal clovers. So you can use the black with the white. You can use, this is the correct color of green with the white. And I have a document. There's 2 documents that USDA has put together just recently. There used to be just a fact sheet about it, but now they've actually done a really nice job on a couple of documents that give you all of the guidelines that you need to know about the 4-H clover. And I will include those when I send out the files for this webinar. I will include that information with those. So that way you guys, everybody's got a copy of those. And then they will go up on our website as well once we start doing the major overhaul. Not a lot has changed in them, but it just lays it out a lot nicer, I think. But you can see you can use this, or it can be white with the black H's, or this is an example of what I said, like a gold embossed clover. And the H's can be either, like here they're gold, they're stamped gold. They can be white, they can be black. One thing about it, so a lot of people ask the question, if they have a clover that has the H's that are clear, this especially when you're on t-shirts and stuff, and you guys can't see this, but let me try. So if you can, you still can't see it. You can kind of see inside the clover on the polo shirts. The clover is actually, the H's are actually navy blue. And when you put it on a piece of paper or on a shirt, you can have the H's can be the same, the color of whatever that product, of that paper or that product. It's not recommended, but knowing that sometimes, especially if you're screen printing on a shirt, if that adds another color to your shirt, and it might add an additional cost, they are pretty good about that. So, and then I also, in this PowerPoint, I also have I have links to the different documents. So I can show just really quick. The one for non-extension users was developed in, I believe, 2014. And really the use of the name and emblem has not changed a lot. Okay. So, and I can never tell if it, so I'm going to share my screen again. So this is the one that gives, this is for the non-users. And it really has a lot of details. So if anybody wants to, this is where the USDA and the 4-H, the national or 4-H national headquarters, this is their building in Washington, D.C. But what I really like about this document is it talks about, you know, that legislative authority. It talks about the basics. And then it goes into, you know, how you can use it for products and services, how you can use it for media. One thing that, sorry, I'm going fast through this, but I wanted to share. So these are examples of products and services that could get approval. So, you know, if you have educational or informational items, so meeting supplies, like if you want to get notebooks or pens or that type of thing, flags or curricula, recognition, you know, ribbons, trophies, all of those things. And then character building, you know, things like clothing or bags, magnets, stickers, jewelry. These are the things that they typically will not, I've not seen them accept any of these. So animal feed, a beauty product, beverage, food. Again, you know, the candy bars, he did not have national permission. He had state permission. Insurance, luxury items, pesticide solvents, or weapons. Now, one thing that I've seen it, I haven't seen it in 4-H necessarily, but I've seen it in some, you know, in other organizations. There are firearms manufacturers that will make a limited edition firearm for an organization, and then that's a fundraiser for that organization. You can see here within 4-H, we do not allow you to do that. So you can't have a Nevada 4-H, 1022 rifle by Ruger made and sell those. Great fundraiser, but they just don't allow it. The one for professionals, sorry, I was trying to find, there we go. The one for professionals does have a little bit different information. This one, it's, again, the 4-H Professionals Handbook. This was just revised in 2019. So it gives more in-depth about the use, name and use. And it also gives you some checklists. So like I said, I am going to be sharing this with you, and you'll be able to get a copy of this. And they're also both available on the USDA website. So if you ever, all you have to do typically is just type in 4-H name and emblem use, or, you know, use of the 4-H name and emblem, and these two pretty much pop up right away. And then here's the guide for the professionals. So are there any questions about, are there any questions about the use of the 4-H name and emblem? And as you guys, you know, as people are putting together things, you know, if you have a question, feel free to shoot me an email, you know, with an example and say, hey, is this legal? Can we do this? You know, I'm always willing to look at that. You know, it's one of those things that I just get used to, and I can typically look at one. And I know Lacey in Northeast Clark County, she had a question about one, and I wasn't 100% positive about the answer to it. So I shot it off to 4-H National Headquarters, to Amy McCune, who's the person that does it there, and said, hey, is this a legal use of the clover? And we found out that it wasn't. So it was a good thing, you know, that we had sent it off. So just, you know, a heads up that, you know, if I don't know the answer, I'm going to send it on and ask that question, and that's okay. So for all the companies using it, you stated that if it said with support or supporting is a little different. So in the newspaper, yeah, that newspaper is, like I said, I honestly don't know if that's legal use. I don't know if those companies had permission to use a name and emblem. It's a newspaper that's out of Oregon. but honestly, because it goes across the entire Western region, I would think it would have needed national. Um, you know, sometimes it's like I don't really want to question it because I don't want to get any of those companies in trouble. Typically, if you do have a company that gets turned into USDA, they're not going to, unless they can see it's a blatant issue. It's not going to be, you know, unless they can see it's really truly they meant to do it. They're going to kick it back to the state and have you work with that organ or with that group or that business. My example that I shared about the meat packing plant, so Arrival Meat, so they had this great news, this great commercial on TV. I actually had seen it when I was in that community, and you know, they were talking about how they supported 4-H and FFA, and the thing that kind of started getting them in trouble was they said, come buy your 4-H and FFA animals from our business, you know, and name their business and everything. And the rival business called USDA and turned them in. And they just called me, or they called the state program leader at the time, and then it got trickled down to me. And we just worked with that business, just sent them in, you know, I think I sent them a letter to start with and just said, you know, hey, in order to do this, you really need approval, you know, and gave them all the information, and then followed it up with a phone call. And they were great. They didn't realize, you know, all of the ramifications for it. So, you know, it's one of those things. Again, they weren't doing it maliciously. They just didn't know. And so, you know, yeah. And, you know, we do it too, where we have businesses around the community that want to show that support, especially around fair time or, you know, other times. And that's, you know, again, if you ever question some of those things, just give me a call and ask. I can, like I said, I can always call USDA and ask them. So I don't know if that answered, but hopefully a little bit in the long roundabout sort of way. Okay, managing risk. My favorite topic in the world. Okay, I will share my screen again. And let me pull up the chat box so I've got it. So that way, if you guys have any questions, I can. Okay. All right. So on the risk management piece, and like they always laugh at me because I say, oh yeah, I love this piece. But it really truly is, to me, an important piece of what we do. Sometimes I get very frustrated with myself, only for the fact that there's times I feel like I can't have a lot of fun, because the first thing I think about in any 4-H activity, and actually it's trickled into my personal life too, anything I ever think about is risk. What's the risk in this? And so, but again, you know, it's just life, and I've learned to deal with it. I've learned to be a little better about it. But so what is risk? You know, this picture is one of my favorites in, you know, risk. It's a chance of loss. This cat knows or potentially knows exactly what they're doing or what he's doing. If not, then, you know. So we take risks every day in our lives. We take a risk getting out of bed in the morning. We take a risk every time we drink a cup of coffee. We all know the McDonald's incident of the cup of coffee. We take a risk driving to and from work. And then we also, you know, we chose this profession, and so we take a risk running a program that involves youth who are, you know, in need of adequate and basic safety and handling. This one talks about, you know, firearms as well. I've used this presentation in shooting sports, you know, but it's all of our programs that we do, you know, whether it's, you know, cooking, or if it's shooting sports or if it's animals or whatever. You know, because the youth typically don't have that thought process for or concern for their own safety. They just want to get out and do it. And so that's where we have to come into play. So risk management. So risk management is really the process used to protect our assets by minimizing the potential of negative outcomes. So what that means is for 4-H is, you know, we need our 4-H groups, our 4-H clubs or groups or planning committees need to anticipate some of the potential risks that might happen. Now, granted, we cannot anticipate all of the risks that are going to happen, but we need to think about a lot of them. And we need to decide how to manage those risks. So then it goes into what is, you know, it also risk is the uncertainty about a future event that it threatens our organization. So one example of that, most of you have seen the email about the shooting sports training for the coming weekend that we ended up deciding to postpone because Reno is supposed to get pretty significant, the Reno area, which includes Virginia City, is supposed to get pretty significant rain. Well, in shooting sports, a big portion of the certification trainings for our volunteers include hands-on experience to shoot. So we can make sure that we feel like they are safe with a firearm. If they're going to be teaching kids, we need to make sure that they're safe. And so knowing that it would be pretty much impossible to shoot outside, we might be able to get a couple hours in here and there. But again, the significant portion is being out at the range, and this particular range is outdoors. So we made the decision because we could not adequately assess our volunteers to make sure that they would be safe. We had to, we just made the decision to postpone. So sometimes you have to make those decisions. And then there's so many unexpected things that can happen. We look at things that can happen to spectators. How there was some, sorry, something just happened, and but I've seen things happen. A horse starts bucking and ends up somehow, I've seen them where they go over the fence and they, end up in the spectators, or, it just everything, or property can be damaged. Or the big one that we're really concerned about for us is our reputation of 4-H. So why is it important? It's important that we ensure the safety of all of our youth and our adults in the program. It also helps us to evaluate our allocation of resources. So what that is, and I've seen this so many times where, there's a program that's pretty risky, and it just, the club or the county continues to do it year after year after year. And the part that, and quite a bit of money goes into it. So it's, if we stop doing this, can we save our money and move to another, use this money in another area? And then it becomes an important educational component of the work, that we're talking we're talking so much about safety and prevention, especially when it comes to our higher risk activities like shooting sports, like large animals, those types of things. And then practicing good risk management allows us to focus on our achieving our mission. So, if we're thinking about the risk management issues on the front end, then we don't have to worry about the potential of we can focus on the positive youth development on the back, while we're teaching. And also, we know that we're going to be pretty safe in the idea that that we have chances of somebody suing us are a lot lower. Now, granted, it can still happen, but if we can show the university that we followed all of the risk management best practices, then we're gonna have that coverage too. So the forms of risk, there's really kind of four 4 types of risk. The physical, where that's the bodily harm. So things like, that's why we make sure that all of our young people that ride horses have a helmet on. That's that bodily risk. We have the reputation, others losing confidence or trust in our organization. That's why we need to be very transparent in our dealings. The emotional risk, the risk of participants feeling upset or uncomfortable or embarrassed. And one example of this that I do like to share is, and this could be, groups could be left wide open for this. So, it's a long-standing tradition at camps and other programs that we have with large groups of kids. If a young person loses a name tag or they lose something, then they have to go in front of the entire group and do some kind of song and dance, or they have to do something to get that name tag back. Okay, it's fun. I understand it. There's a couple of them that absolutely, if this is happening, so there's a couple of those little activities. If you still have young people that have to write their names with their butts, butt to the audience and write their name, please stop. I had to actually go, we had our teen conference, 500 kids there, and there was a kid that lost something, and they lost their name tag or whatever, and they were up in front of the group writing their name with their butt, and I promptly proceeded to the front of the room and said, stop this immediately. I told the adult that was in charge, I said, absolutely not acceptable. It is, and this wasn't here, this was in another state, but that is sexual harassment, both on the part of the young person on stage and also those that were in the audience. And so while they didn't really truly understand that, they did follow, I had said before the conference even started that you cannot do that one, and they did it anyway. And that was teens making that decision, and an adult did not step in to say, no, you can't do that. So I did. It's just what, I don't like doing that, but sometimes you have to. But the thing about that is that's an emotional, we don't know if a kid loses something and we make them sing a song, we don't know necessarily that they aren't on the autism spectrum, or they don't like to get in front of people. And so you really have to get their permission. And if they say no, they don't want to do it, then you just hand them back whatever they've lost and move on. So because again, we have that's that emotional, they don't feel safe in that environment. And then we also have our financial risk. We always have to think, and I hate it, but we always have to think, so could somebody potentially sue me for this? So some important risk management terms. Liability. So this is, the University of Nevada does provide liability insurance for our volunteers and our staff, as long as you or the volunteer are acting within the scope of their job description. Now, the key to that, and that's why it's important to have job descriptions. And so we have to remember, that we do have that. Okay, the forms of liability, you can read, there's neglect, there's assault and battery, there's false arrest and imprisonment, invasion of privacy, defamation, and the violation of constitutional rights. Probably the one that we run into the most, I would say, would be defamation, and then probably neglect. And neglect would be more of, we neglected to make sure that, every kid had safety glasses on, or, those types of things are the neglect, rather than, we're neglecting a child. So some risk management strategies. There's 4 strategies for risk management. So we can reduce the risk. So this is, we can, you're removing the risks or hazards. So if you can see that picture, that is actually Washington State has a grizzly bear research station. It's awesome. We loved going over and seeing the bears, but they had a lot of precautions because they couldn't just allow the public to go look at the bears. And so you can see this. First of all, there's a double fence between the public and the bears. They've put up the sign, that says danger, wild animals, do not approach. You can just see a lot of the pieces, a lot of what they've done to eliminate some of those risks. They made people aware of the risk. We transfer the risk. So this is another example. So we're taking that risk and we're shifting it to someone else. So examples of that is we charter a bus. So when we take kids to 4-H camp. Now I know the locals, when we have people from Reno or people from, Carson or whatever, it's a little, it seems really sometimes ridiculous to charter a bus. And that one we don't typically do. But when you're coming from Vegas, when you have a long drive to make, it really is better to charter a bus because what you're doing is then putting that liability on the bus company rather than on extension. And remember that we as professionals cannot sign contracts even for those buses. We have to send those over to the university and they sign the contract because they make sure that the proper wording is in there for that. Another one is holding meetings in public places rather than in your own home. So, and I know a lot of people do hold their 4-H meetings in their home, but, for those clubs that are holding it in public places, again, those contracts a lot of times will, the university makes sure that they are not held responsible for that liability, that, for anything that's related to the building itself. In your own home, if you have a broken step coming into your house, you're held liable for that broken step if somebody breaks through and, breaks their leg or whatever. And if you're at a public place, a public building, and there's a broken step, then that place of business is liable for that. So you avoid risk. Sometimes it's just not worth it. You take steps to remove the hazard. So, example, instead of going on a night hike, maybe you go on a day hike. Or you just could discontinue that high risk event. One example I've seen happen is one of the things I've done too. So we all love dodgeball, great game, but the year that I had to take, I think 4 or 5 kids to the hospital for dodgeball injuries, I finally had to say, not worth it, guys. Sorry, I know it's great, I know it's fun, but we're having too many kids get hurt. And so we have to really think about that and really make those decisions. One that Brian just walked in my office and it reminded me of one that happened with him is he had at his 4-H camp, they always like to play flashlight tag, after dark, and they'd run through the woods with flashlights playing flashlight tag. I think one year he said he had to take like 4 or 5 kids had to be seen by the nurse. And I think 3 of them had to go to the hospital, one of them with a broken bone. And he made the decision at that point that flashlight tag, not going to do that anymore because, running through the woods, we all know what the risks are there. So sometimes you just have to think about those things. And then sometimes we just assume risk. We assume risk with our shooting sports. We assume risk with our equine program, with our large animal, even with our, our foods and nutrition when they're cooking on a stove. We have assumed that risk. one of the things that we do is we have them sign a waiver. We take all the precautions, and then we just make sure that they have all the safety equipment on it. This was our 4-H ambassadors in North Dakota. They had been bugging me for years to do a high ropes course. They really, really wanted to do a high ropes course activity. Great activity for them to do. I was like all for it. I was thankful that I was pregnant and couldn't go on the high ropes course or kind of be coerced into going on the high ropes course, because those of you that know me know that I don't like heights at all. And so I think I would have freaked out a little bit, but we did. We took all the precautions. We went to a company that had a high ropes course. We made sure everybody had the right equipment. Everybody's equipment was working. They signed the waivers, the whole bit. So we just assumed that risk. Sorry. So our volunteer liability protection. So a couple of things about this we need to remember is only our authorized volunteers are entitled to that university liability. And they are an authorized volunteer, and this is where they don't necessarily have to be a certified volunteer, and this is why. Because sometimes we ask somebody so we have to move pig pens at the fair, and it's you and you don't see anybody else, but you see a couple of dads standing right there. They may not be certified volunteers, but they're dads. You as a UNCE staff person have asked them to help you. So then, and you're carrying the pig pens, and one of them trips and, does something. So you would be covered under that liability insurance because you have asked them to help you. Now they wouldn't be covered under, potentially under accident insurance, but the university doesn't offer accident insurance, but again, you have requested that authority. As long as it's within the scope of what you ask them to do. If you ask them to move pig pens from point A to point B, that is the only time that they are covered under that liability insurance. If, something else happens, then they are not. Our certified volunteers are protected under the liability insurance as long as they're doing what is within the scope of their program. Now, and so one example that I've heard, and this is crazy, but it's happened, there was a volunteer that was having a rabbit meeting at their house, and they asked the team leader to go out and mow their lawn. The team leader was injured mowing the lawn. That volunteer, the university did not provide legal services to that volunteer when the teen's family sued them for the fact that they were the teen was not helping with the rabbit club, which is what they were supposed to be doing. So they had that teen do something outside of the realm. So that's one, so those are things that we need to keep in mind. And then we have special areas of consideration. So, water sports, we at 4-H camp, we require if you have water time, and this should be if you are doing 4-H camp at Tahoe, if you're doing 4-H camp in your local community, I don't care. If you have open water and you have those kids with access to that open water, you must have lifeguards on duty. And that's not one lifeguard per 150 kids. That is, I can't remember what the ACA requirements are for lifeguards, but there are those requirements, and we would just need to find those. And here also, these guys were in a pool. The river at that time, we had a kayaking class during our Extension Youth Conference, and the river was raging, so they could not go kayaking on the river, and so they ended up kayaking in the university's pool. But again, every kid had to have on a life jacket, so we made sure that that was one of those things. And then we have shooting sports. I mean, most people know or will, you have to have the range marked off. You cannot allow anybody in or out of the range while there's active shooting going on. Everybody here has some kind of ear protection on because they are using a rifle. Everybody has eye protection on. If you look at the background, even the spectators have eye protection on, and that is, we have to have that. So, excuse me. The big thing with volunteers, I think especially, and with staff, is we need to make sure we have a risk management plan. And so there's a couple of documents on our website that I think, we've got some really good documents. And I'm going to, again, those are going to be, when I share all of the PowerPoints, I will share them as handouts, so that way you don't necessarily have to look them up on the website, but know that they are there. There is a risk management checklist, and this was one, it's not an official one, but it is, it's really good for the general club. There is, under the shooting sports portion of the website, there is a risk management plan for shooting sports. And those plans are actually required to be turned in. Every shooting sports club needs to turn in a risk management plan at the beginning of the 4-H year. And so, that'll be something that we're going to start really being very strict on. And that's coming from the university. It's not just 4-H, but the university. And also national are being strict about that as well. But the risk management checklist, let me pull it up. Okay, I'll share that now. So this is the checklist. And again, this is not what you should be using for shooting sports. This is strictly for a general club. But it talks about, the activity planning, if it's applicable, have you got the field trip permission? Have you got the photo release? Have you trained your volunteers? Facilities, you're looking at facilities. First aid, do you have a first aid kit? That seems to be probably the one that gets used or forgot the most often. Emergency situations, maybe you have a safety officer. If it's a high risk activity, maybe there is a safety officer. Let's see, transportation, and then overnight activities. So I think, that's just a document, again, that is very, very basic, but something that we need to be using. Okay. Sorry, I'm going back to sharing my screen. So, and then, I think it's also important that we have our young people helping with planning some of the risk management, thinking about risk management. It gets them thinking about it as well. And what a great life lesson to learn. So chaperones, and these may be, I think they're pretty close. So the Policies and Procedures Committee actually just came up with, and they'll be coming out by October 1, but these are, they just came out with some recommendations for chaperones. But essentially, really kind of a good rule of thumb is 1 adult to every 10 youth, especially if they're under the age of 13. For overnight events, you really need to have 1 to 10 for 13 and over, and 1 to 6 for 12 and under. Adult chaperones need to be the age of majority and not an enrolled 4-H member. So essentially, typically the age of majority is 18. But you, and this needs to change too. But anyway, sorry. But we do, they cannot be an enrolled 4-H member and also serve as a chaperone. They have to be a certified 4-H volunteer, and that is critical. They have to be a certified adult volunteer. And then this says unrelated youth and adults may stay in the same room. That will change. Sorry, I missed that one today. The only time youth and adults may stay in the same room if they are, if it's in an overnight situation besides camp, is if they are related, like a parent or guardian and a child. And in that case, they can also stay. You can have like a female, a mom and a son stay in the same room as long as they are immediately related. And then youth and adults should never be one-to-one. Okay, all chaperones for overnight events must have completed the volunteer, every step of the volunteer process. They have to have the fingerprints, and the fingerprints must be back. The results must be back. They have to complete the child abuse and neglect self-study guide, or however your county handles that. They must complete the reference check, the application. Everything has to be done before they can be a chaperone. So if you're working on chaperones for camp, I would start doing it right now, trying to get the paperwork done. So in emergency procedures, your first priority is to get medical attention to that injured person. Your second priority is to contact the parent or the guardian and let them know what's happening. Unless it's like, if they get a cut on their finger or something, but if they require, especially if they require a trip to the hospital, or, it's a significant injury, then you need to contact the parent. The next step, and this is for volunteers, we need to make sure that they know that they need to contact the county 4-H professional or the staff member. That is critical. The other piece that I always try to put in there is, then I need you as the county person to then contact me and it can be the next day, that's fine, unless it's a significant injury. I mean, if we have if it's like a bad situation, I need to know. But otherwise, we need to, and you need to let your extension educator or your program manager know that same, know too, that this is happening. And then be prepared to do the incident report. I was looking at the university guidelines, and there are certain guidelines within the university, and I don't remember what they are now, but of when an incident report needs to be filed. Finances. One of the things we're going to talk about, we're going to spend a whole session on finances, but we have federal regulations that govern the continued use of the 4-H name and emblem. And one of those is all clubs need to turn in an annual financial report or annual reporting and accountability. Even if they have $0, typically a lot of counties don't ask it if they don't have any money, which is, we don't have to get those, but I recommend that you do, just to get them in the habit of doing them in case for some reason one day they do get money. And reminding our volunteers that all 4-H money and all 4-H and all equipment purchased with 4-H money is public funds. And so, the money received by a 4-H club is public, and since we are a public organization. I know we've been dealing with a couple of volunteers who think because they wrote the grants to the Friends of the NRA that those firearms are their personal property. And the grants were written in the name of 4-H. They were written in the name of the 4-H club, etc. That is the case. Is anything that they purchase with 4-H funds, it's not a consumable item, then belongs to 4-H, or that is donated to the 4-H program. One good example is we had a county that had a really strong robotics program. They had one person that had an old armored truck. Don't ask me why he had an old armored truck, but he did. And he decided to then donate that armored truck to this 4-H, to the 4-H robotics program. They had it wrapped, and I mean, it was really kind of cool. But when we were going through this whole process, I looked at the county educator and I said, you do realize that when this club disbands, Bannock County 4-H now owns an armored truck. And she's like, oh crap. And then she's like, well, okay, I guess. And then like a year later, they had 2 12-passenger vans donated to them. So that's probably not, a county's not going to be as upset about a 12-passenger van being given to them than an armored truck, because, you find a lot of use for 12-passenger vans. Armored trucks, not so much. But, it's things like that people need to realize. We had another club that the club paid for half of a goat, a male goat that they used for breeding, and the club leader paid for the other half. And then, they would, I don't know what it's called in the goat world, but, if somebody wanted to breed to this goat, or, if they bred it to whatever and they got babies and anything was sold from it, then the club would get half of the money and the leader would get half of the money. Well, all fine and dandy until the club decided that they didn't want to be a club anymore. Everybody had either aged out or whatever. What do you do with half a goat? It's kind of difficult to do anything with a half a goat. So I can't remember how we resolved that one. I think the leader ended up paying the club for the half of the goat or whatever. She ended up buying out the club in that, whatever. It was just crazy. So, really caution your clubs on some of those things. Again, fundraising, this is where it comes into the financial and the reputation. Money raised in the name of 4-H must be used for 4-H purposes. Fundraising should only be conducted to meet a club goal. And that's, we want to make sure that our money, that they're not hoarding money. Clubs should not really, truly have, if they've got over $2,000 and they don't have a plan for that money, then we need to sit down and visit with them about that. There's really no reason a club should even have $1,000 unless they're building it up for a reason. And that's at the end of the year. I know they do fundraisers and they may have $3,000 in an account at that time. So transportation, a couple of risk management things with transportation. You should not, and you should tell your volunteers, you should really never transport one youth. It should never be 1-to-1 ratio in transportation. 15-passenger vans are not allowed to transport youth. That is a university policy about, it's probably been, more than 10 years ago, probably almost 20 years ago now, not quite, but between 15 and 20 years ago. I don't know if any of you remember, there was a big rash of 15-passenger van crashes, and there were people killed. I mean, it was just a whole variety. Okay. Oh, good. I'm glad to see that, Sarah. She just said UNR policy and Washoe's learning, Nevada cannot accept live donations. So do not accept live animals. Tell your clubs they cannot accept live animals as donations. Thank you. That's a good thing to know, because I had not seen that one. Believe me, that was a crazy one for us. And it was only a half a goat. It wasn't even a whole goat. That was the crazy thing. But anyway, so there were a ton of 15-passenger van accidents, and lots of students were killed. I know in North Dakota it happened prior to myself coming on, but we had 2 vanfuls of our 4-H ambassadors, 15-passenger vans of 4-H ambassadors, coming back from a retreat. And one of those, and bad roads, they shouldn't have been on the road anyway, but it was before, they had somebody that doesn't like bad roads, but one of the vans crashed, and thank goodness we did not lose anyone. We did have one of our members break her back and was in the hospital for a month or more. And then we had another one lose a limb. And so, pretty significant crash. So it was about that time that almost every university said no more transporting college students or youth under the age of 18 in a 15-passenger van. And most insurance companies refused to insure 15-passenger vans if they were going to be transporting youth. So know that. And there is a transportation policy and transportation form on our website. So know that you can look that up. So accident insurance. We do not automatically provide accident insurance. When we talk about the fact that, UNR provides insurance, that is liability insurance. And for volunteers, it is workman's comp, which is it will pay for injuries as long as it happens on, when they're on 4-H time within the scope of their responsibilities. We do have the opportunity to purchase accident insurance for both our volunteers and for our members. It can be a $1 or $2 a year policy. It's a supplemental accident insurance. I think the most it pays is maybe $3,000. So I tell people it covers most people's deductibles. But it is very, very good. And to do that, it really should be the 4-H professional. I know some counties have their clubs do their own insurance. And if that's the way you've been doing it and it's working okay, then that's fine. But if you're not doing that, your best bet is to collect that $1 or $2 per member and just do it as a county insurance policy. The reason I say that is because that way you're finding out when they are when they file claims with that company. And so what it is $1 a year for every 4-H member, except those that are in the equine program, so in the horse program, and that is $2 a year. And like I said, it covers if they're in an accident driving to and from a 4-H event. A couple of years ago, when I was in Idaho, we had a family that was in a car accident when they were driving to the state horse contests. And the accident insurance was covered under, or that accident was, it paid up to $3,000 of their expenses. It wasn't enough, but it at least covered that much. It also covers ambulance rides. I had a 4-H'er when I first started in extension that was hoof blacking her horse's hooves and for showmanship, and the horse had a fly on its belly and just kicked up its back leg and hit her in the head, knocked her out. She had to take an ambulance to the hospital. Checked her out. She was fine. She came back to the fair, and I, of course, didn't know any of this had happened yet. The horse superintendent let her back on her horse. She was in the ring. I don't know what happened. I think she just passed out, fell off her horse. Ambulance came and got her again. Same day, within 5 hours of each other. Ambulance came and got her again, took her back to the hospital. She still didn't have a concussion, thank goodness. But the American Income Life, who provides this insurance, covered both incidences, covered the ambulance ride on both trips, and they treated it as two separate incidences. And so I didn't find out about it until after the second incident had happened. And that's when we had a talk about, okay, she went to the hospital with a potential head injury. What do you think you should have done? Probably not let her back on the horse in 100-degree heat in an outdoor arena. Bareback class. So we had to talk about risk management there. But again, we learned that the company is fantastic in those incidences. And I've tried to find it. I don't believe it's required in Nevada, but I'd like to see us move towards that. But I highly recommend it. And if you need information about that, about where, or actually the next slide has it. So the other thing you can do is if you're having a special event, and I recommend this for all of our camps, is you do the special event insurance. Even if you have the $1 a year insurance, if you have young youth that are not 4-H members attending camp, you can do the special event insurance. It's still an accident insurance. It's not liability insurance. It's accident insurance, and it is. It's like up to 35 cents maybe. I haven't looked lately to see how much it is. But it is about 35 cents a person per day. So like we always take it out for the state livestock contest. And the reason we do that is because if we have spectators that are there, it will cover them as well. So we always, we add in how many we think are going to be there. One of the companies that you can use is American Income Life. We typically tend to say that that's the company to use, but we're not implying endorsement. It's just they have their own division for 4-H and cooperative extension. And so you can call them up. Her name is Erin, and she is fantastic. She is a former extension educator in one of the Midwest states, probably Indiana, and she is just wonderful. And that's one of the reasons why, because they know we have weird things that happen. So again, highly recommended. And then, so I'm not going to go through these right now, but there are some risk management scenarios in here that you can look at for your volunteers, or if you can look at those when I send it. So here's because I just looked at the time and we're getting close on time, sorry. So here, think about this. You've carefully thought about all the angles. You've done it 1,000 times. It comes naturally to you. You've done what you've been doing, that you've been trained to do your whole life. Nothing can go wrong, right? We need to think again. So, here's an example. Poor little guy. And we just need to remember risk management, it's really our job. Again, like I said, for me, sometimes it drives me crazy and it drives my entire family crazy, because the first thing I think about is what is the risk involved in this? So any questions about risk management? I know that was going over a lot, and I'll be sharing a lot of this stuff with you guys. So, I've got all the documents from our website and a couple of other things I've picked up over the years. So, okay. I'm going to give it just a second for people in case they're typing a question. Okay, so we're going to talk about the essential elements, and this one won't take too long. And I've got some really good documents that'll help, that can explain this. So the essential elements, if you were on for the previous sessions when I talked about the, when I talked about developmental levels or ages and stages, when I talked about the asset approach to 4-H or asset approach to youth development, kind of those positive youth development theories. Essential elements is one of the other ones that I think is really important that we have an understanding of as we're moving into, as we're working with young people. So a good way to remember this is the big M. So you see BIGM, so big M, belonging, independence, mastery, and generosity, or belonging, independence, generosity, and mastery. So as we look at this, when you think about belonging, so what that means is youth really need to to know that they're cared about by others and that they feel a sense of connection to the others within the group. As a facilitator, it's really important that you provide youth the opportunity to feel both physically and emotionally safe in that while they're in that activity, or when they're participating as a group. Creating that safe and inclusive environment and fostering that positive relationship with the youth learners. So this is really, I tell people all the time, my job is to provide both a physically and emotionally safe environment for all youth that are participating. And so, we have to think about all of our youth, and we may have youth from variety of backgrounds. And so how can we make them all feel welcome into our program? It's good here to use discussion questions that maybe encourage youth to learn from each other. They can use ideas collectively. Here's some other things. This is why icebreakers, games, social time are really important. And I'll be honest with you, I am not one to play the little icebreaker games, and I know I do them all the time, but they're not always my favorite thing to do. I always tell people I'm not the really gamey I'm not the typical 4-H professional where, let's play all the games and have all the fun. I think it's critical though, and that's why I do it. I just, I know it's critical. So we make time to do it. An example of that, so in my son's football, I think I had mentioned this maybe in one of the other sessions, but in my son's football team, the second year when when I was more involved, the first practice, the kids were just out there practicing. They might have said their names. I don't even think they said what their names were. The second practice, I looked at the coach and I said, "Hey, Steve, did you have them introduce themselves yesterday?" "Oh, no." And I said, "Okay, I get them during break. I get every kid during break, and we are going to learn each other's names because it's ridiculous that we are not even, the kids have to figure out who each other are." So during the break, I took all the kids and we went in a circle, the typical circle. And all I did was have them introduce themselves, what their name was, what grade they were in, and what their favorite football team was. I didn't, I was just trying to think of something that they could then bond over. And you know what? That is probably the most camaraderie I've seen in a team of any, and he's been playing for a long time. And I truly think part of it was we took the time for the kids to get to know each other, and all of the coaches and the team moms and the business manager, we were all involved in that process as well. And again, it took longer than they wanted it to, but I told them I didn't care and to suck it up. And this coming year, I'm going to do the same thing. They're not going to get a choice because I really see that difference. Encourage cross-age linkages, youth staff bonding. It's okay to really, to get to know the kids. Encourage those ties with family and community, and make small group time. So you can also encourage the collaborative and the cooperative learning, not just the competitive. Show respect for the value of diverse cultures. If you've got a diverse group of young people in a group, talk about it. One of the best activities is out of character counts. They have a respect activity, and what it is everybody thinks about what's one holiday tradition, and it doesn't matter what holiday it is, but what's one holiday tradition that they carry on from their heritage, and what's one food that maybe came from their heritage that they continue to cook. I did that with a group. I was doing a character program with trio kids that were in the trio program. And this was Fargo has the largest refugee population per capita of anywhere in the country. We had refugees from all across the world. And we had probably 10 different countries. The kids were enrolled in this program. And that was the coolest experience that I've ever seen, because they were, they were talking about what's one tradition they brought with them when they moved to the United States from a holiday. And it was just so cool to learn that from the kids. I loved it. It was like one of my favorite things I've ever done. So mastery. So this is, really to develop that self-confidence. Youth need to feel like they can feel and believe that they are capable and that they can experience success when they're solving problems or meeting challenges. So they need to know, they need a breadth and depth of topics to allow them to pursue their interests. And it gives them, introduce youth to expert knowledge. When a volunteer or an adult is helping them, they get that expert knowledge and then guide them towards their own sense of mastery. I sometimes have a hard time with this word, because to me mastery means you're perfect at something, but you have to take it from the standpoint of mastery here means that they are trying something new and they have success with that program. So really mixing that hands-on activities with applied or work-related challenges, supplementing competition with cooperative activities, looking at a multifaceted approach. Maybe they do a group investigation, experiential learning. There's multiple outcomes of an event, and looking at those long-term goals of learning. And knowing that model and teach that failure and frustration are learning experiences. We need to make 4-H a safe place to fail. I know that sounds funny, but they really need to have, because kids need to learn how to fail, and they need to learn how to do it properly. And then, we talk them through what could you do differently next time. Independence. So this is knowing that youth need to know that they are able to influence people and events through decision-making and action. They learn better. They learn to better understand themselves and become independent thinkers when they have this kind of sense of independence. And throughout each of our curriculum, most of our 4-H curriculum, youth are given opportunities to develop and reflect upon the thoughts and responses to the challenges or those explorations that they're doing. And they begin to understand that they're able to act as change agents with confidence and competence as a result from their learning. So you can see some of the things. Before we make a decision as a staff member or volunteers make a decision, we need to ask ourselves, is this something that a youth can make the decision on? Or is this something that we should be asking them about? Including youth in the planning discussions and encourage their input. I'm a firm believer that we need to have youth on all of our leaders councils, in fact, the Extension Advisory Committee did not have anybody under the age of 35, or probably 30. And that was one of the things that next time I met with Dr. Lyles, as I said, a couple of things I noticed. Number one, there were no young people at the table, and we need to have young people at the table. Number two, the diversity wasn't quite as rich as I would have liked to have had it. But to me, my job is to promote the young person too, and so, or to really advocate for the youth. And so we had a conversation about how we could add, and not one, but 2 or 3, or actually, if you really truly look at youth adult partnership, it should be equal representation, but knowing that that's not always going to happen. And then, asking the youth to do something instead of telling them to do it. We all, if you have children at home, you've seen this. I started asking instead of telling at home, and it made a huge difference. So, you can see those others. Let's see. Help youth explore the course of action or appropriate decisions. One of the reasons why we decided to do the civil dialogue discussion right here, we need to, help them explore some of those opportunities. And then we have generosity. And so this is really where youth need to feel like their lives have meaning and purpose. And, really encourage them to broaden their perspectives, find relevance in that topic area, and then bring those ideas back to their community. So this could be mentoring, tutoring programs with cross ages, tying the skills and ability to how they can be used in positive ways. Um, what are some, and then using the opportunities to encourage young people to imagine the feelings of others, and highlighting the effect of young people's behavior, both positive and negative, and then reinforcing those gestures of caring and concern. So, you know, we look at transformational experiences, or youth development experiences become transformational when we provide the young people that opportunity to belong to something, to master the skills through their experience, to influence others, and to learn the meaning of service. So there is some really good resources on National 4-H website on essential elements. There's actually a whole curriculum on essential elements. I do have a copy of it here at this office. We've done training on it in the past, or I've done training on it in the past. It's not something, you know, but what I really highly recommend is, you know, utilizing that curriculum in Leaders Council meetings. I know some places, they will do training for volunteers a half an hour before the start of the Leaders Council meeting. So, and then a lot, you know, I've seen where they've taken a lesson out of the essential elements and taught that lesson to the young people, or to the volunteers, so then they could have that better understanding of that. I know that was really quick, and wow, 3:02, I finished quickly. Any questions on essential elements? I know that was super quick. Or any questions about any of the topics that we discussed today? I'm giving people a second to, okay, email the logos. Yeah, yep. So what I'm going to do is I will put everything in the box like I've done in the past, and like the PowerPoints and the handouts and all of those, and I will, and then I'll send out that link along with the link to the recording. Most of the, I mean, I'll tell you, most of the logos on the web for 4-H are correct. You know, they are legal. It's just there are some that are not. And so we have to just be cautious of them. Okay. Anything else? Just a really quick, I know I mentioned early on, and I forgot to tell people because I learned this the other day. I had always heard that there were three symbols or three logos that were federally protected as the, you know, including the 4-H Clover. And the other day I found out there are actually 5. Sorry. Does anybody know what any of those 4 besides the 4-H Clover, what those other 4 are? I'm waiting for people to see if they know. Is anybody still on, listening? Okay, well, so they are the, nope, 4-H Grows Here is not one of them. Because it has a clover in it, it's one of them. It is the presidential seal. It is the Olympic rings, the Red Cross, and Smokey Bear. I learned Smokey Bear and Red Cross like less than a month ago. I've been doing this for 24 years, and I didn't. And they told me that's not new. They've always been there, but I'd always heard 3, and I learned there were 5. And I confirmed it with 4-H headquarters. So yeah, it was just kind of an interesting idea that Smokey Bear and Red Cross were in there too. So, all right. Well, if there aren't any other questions, I will let everybody go. And thank you. We do have another session next week. Let me look. On Tuesday, the 10th, from 10 to 11:30, and I'll send out the Zoom link and remind everybody about it. So, and I can't remember what the topics are. I can tell you in 2 seconds. Topics for that one are, this one's important, 4-H enrollment and reporting and evaluating for impact. So we're going to talk about within the 4-H or within 4-H Online, what to report where. I'm not going to go in the ins and outs of 4-H Online, but just what do we need to report as a group enrollment, what needs to be reported as an individual enrollment, and how you count those numbers. So, and then basic evaluation. So hopefully you can join us. So thank you, everybody. And if there aren't any other questions, I will let you go.